calling for an ambulance and being unable to tell them where you live. No street number, no zip code, just the blue house past the mill, near the church with the broken bell. That wasn't some remote village 1,000 years ago. That was most of Europe just 300 years ago. Kings, tax collectors, even soldiers trying to find their own barracks got lost in cities with no numbers, no system, no way to pin down a single home among thousands. So how did an entire civilization function without something we now consider basic as breathing? How did a merchant get a letter delivered? How did a doctor find a dying patient in time? Stick around, because the answer is stranger and darker than you'd expect. For most of human history, cities didn't organize themselves around numbers. They organized themselves around memory, landmarks, and word of mouth. Picture medieval London or Paris. Streets weren't grids. They were a tangle that grew organically over centuries, one crooked lane connecting to the next. There was no 123 Main Street. There was no way to write down a location that a stranger could actually follow. This wasn't a small inconvenience. As cities exploded in population between the 1100s and 1500s, this lack of structure became a real crisis. Tax collectors couldn't tell who owed what. Postal couriers wandered for hours. Armies billeted in a city had no way to track which houses their soldiers were staying in. And when disease outbreaks hit, officials had no way to know which homes needed to be quarantined. The problem wasn't just, how do I find my friend's house? It was, how does a growing, complex society keep track of itself at all? So, what did people actually do? They relied on signs, trades, and stories. Every house of any importance had a painted or carved symbol hanging above its door: a golden fleece, a red lion, 3 compasses, an owl. These weren't decorations. They were the address. If you needed to find the wool merchant, you didn't ask for a street number. You asked for the House of the Golden Fleece, 2 doors past the baker. Streets themselves carried this same logic in their names, and many still do today. London's Bread Street sat where the medieval bread market once stood. Vienna had a street simply known as the Baker's Street. Paris had a lane known as the Street of the Butchers. Trades clustered together, so an entire neighborhood's identity was baked into its layout. You navigated by trade, by smell, by sound, by the shape of a building, not by a number. Giving directions was closer to storytelling than instruction. You'd hear things like, walk past the fountain, turn where the tanner's stench gets strong, and look for the door with the carved owl. It worked, as long as you already knew the city or had someone local to guide you. For strangers, travelers, and especially for governments trying to manage thousands of citizens at once, it was chaos. The shift didn't come from convenience. It came from control. The earliest numbering we know of appeared on a bridge in Paris in the 1460s, where about 68 houses were marked, though historians still debate whether this was a true address system or just a way to catalog property. A similar early experiment happened in a housing estate in Augsburg, Germany in the early 1500s, but the real turning point came in the 1700s, and it was driven almost entirely by governments needing to find people. Armies needed to track where soldiers were being housed in civilian homes. Empires needed to conscript young men into military service. Tax collectors needed to know exactly who owed what and where they lived. In the 1720s, authorities in Prague numbered homes, specifically to track a religious minority for conscription. In Prussia, officials were ordered to number houses in villages the night before troops marched in. By the 1750s and 60s, large-scale numbering had spread through Madrid, London, Paris, and Vienna. In 1770, the Habsburg Empress ordered a sweeping numbering system across her territories for taxation, census, and military purposes. And in 1768, the King of France decreed that houses outside Paris be numbered, mainly so troops could be located and quartered. In other words, house numbers were not invented so you could get a package delivered. They were invented so the state could find you. That system of control became the backbone of modern convenience. Once cities had reliable numbering, everything downstream became possible. Organized postal delivery, ambulances and fire services that can locate you in seconds, census data, voter registration, banking, even GPS navigation and food delivery apps. Every time your phone pinpoints your exact door, it's standing on 300 years of bureaucratic Evolution that started with kings, trying to count soldiers and collect taxes. The convenience came later. The origin was surveillance and order. And there's something worth sitting with here. The tension between being findable and being free isn't new. It's been part of how cities and governments have negotiated power for centuries. Every address on every envelope carries a small echo of that history. Here's one that surprises people. In 1805, Napoleon personally standardized how Paris numbered its streets, deciding that odd numbers would run along one side and even numbers along the other. That exact even-odd logic, born from one emperor's decree over 2 centuries ago, is still the system most of the world uses on the street outside your own home today. So next time you glance at your address, remember, it wasn't built for your convenience. It was built so no one could ever disappear.